Hello there, and welcome to the Get French Football News preview show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Samuel Rooke and Tom Scholes. That final international break of 2017 is in the rear view mirror now, and until March, really, it's all domestic football for us to enjoy. However, we'll take one last glance at Les Bleus and keep our eyes on the road in Ligue 1 after the latest headlines. France performed admirably on Tuesday evening, earning a 2-2 draw against Germany. Alexandre Lacazette scored twice, but a Lars Stindl strike in added time meant that there was a share of the spoils. In Ligue 1 news, Oscar Garcia has quit as manager of Saint-Etienne. The former Brighton and Watford boss was reportedly at odds with the club's hierarchy after a number of promises from the summer were broken. And that's all for your major headlines, at least. But for all the latest in the world of French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this evening with Les Bleus, who did earn a credible 2-2 draw, and it could have been a little bit more had some things gone their way. We talked a little bit on Monday's podcast about the things we were expecting and the potential lineup and who maybe needed to stand up. And two of those men really, Sam, were Lacazette and Martial, who we expected to start. And they certainly performed in this one, both of them.
They definitely did. I mean, you really can't ask more of Lacazette than to score 2 goals against Germany. I mean, that's an excellent performance. He got his chances and he put them away, and that's great. And people have sort of always questioned whether he exactly fits in to this France squad and whether he exactly fits into Deschamps' ideals of how he wants to play. But he's been rewarded. His faith has been rewarded by Lacazette scoring both those goals. And then Martial, even more excitingly, that assist for Lacazette's at first was just sensational piece of footwork, just beautiful. And it wasn't the only thing he produced. I think if you compare it to, say, Kingsley Coman, his performance against Wales in a sort of similar wide-ish forward role, Coman looked good but didn't deliver. Martial delivered, and he must have done himself a great service. He's pushed himself right to the head of the queue in Deschamps' mind, I think, because he made some errors. He passed when he probably should have shot, and he wasn't perfect, but he really took the game to Germany, and he really left his mark.
Yeah, I thought he was really excellent, and that little bit of footwork, especially in the box, was reminiscent of a highlight he had in pre-season as well. That showed that he's got great close ball control, and that he really was excellent. And he was maybe should have sealed it in the last couple of minutes as well with a chance. But there's a lot of positives really to take in this one. Again, Tom, we were talking on Monday again about the Wales game, that there was highlights from there that showed that they could sort of dominate a game. But here against a Germany side that, yes, maybe some would argue was under strength, but they still had plenty of attacking talent on display. And France held their own for a long periods of this game.
Yeah, I mean, when France comes up against certain nations, with all due respect to Wales, if Gareth Bale doesn't play, they're not going to dominate a team. And even when he does play, they're not exactly a possession-based side as it is. So 9 times out of 10, France will dominate the game. But against a Germany team away from home, and they set up in a different way almost, I enjoyed how they played, because the forward three, there's 3 players. Okay, maybe Lacazette isn't as versatile as the others, but they can all interchange, and they can swap flanks, and they can swap positions, and they can keep the defence on their toes. I think that was one of the major positives that I looked at it. But at the same time, they created a lot of chances as well. And on another day, I was just looking at the highlights beforehand, before I came on this, and I was looking at it. I forgot how many chances they created sometimes, with Martial and Lacazette and Mbappe really getting involved. And, I think their fluidity and how well they played, and you mentioned Martial, and he's good enough to start for, I'd probably say, 90% of the nations, 95% of the nations going to the World Cup. And I think it would be a massive shame if he doesn't start for France ahead of some of the other wingers they've got going for them at the moment, because he's so good at running at defenders. And I'm not comparing him to Thierry Henry before I make this comparison and I fall into that trap. But the way he runs and the way the defenders back off him, it does remind me of when you see old clips of Henry at Arsenal where he'd run, he'd cut in on the inside, and he'd just have defenders on toast every time. And that's what watching Martial does sometimes to me. And I think, them three up front, they showed that France can play in a different way occasionally on the counter attack, and they've got the pace to really hurt teams, even a team as good as Germany.
Yeah, exactly. And it was maybe a little bit of a lapse of defending and bits like that saw them get back into the game. I mean, the Timo Werner goal as well. I have to blame Jallet on that one. He's so far up the field compared to the rest of the defenders. It's a bit laughable. But Sam, it was interesting in this one that Deschamps showed a little bit more flexibility than we've seen, at least in recent months. I know during the European Championships, he moved to that 4-2-3-1 and it was really successful. And it showed it again on Friday that it did give more help really to Griezmann, and Giroud performed really admirably in that. But they also then showed on Tuesday night that they can do a 4-3-3 against a world-class side. And I just want your opinion on it because we mentioned it on Mondays as well. Which do you prefer, having seen both now? Do you think that this side suits a 4-3-3 better or the 4-2-3-1?
I think when all the players are available, fit and available, and fingers crossed that Mendy is available at left back, the 4-3-3 just allows them to absolutely rip teams to pieces. And I think Deschamps is always going to lean on Giroud because he believes in Giroud, he believes in his role. He's responded to that in the past, and so I think Deschamps is unlikely to play this sort of a 4-3-3, the fluidity, the interchange we were talking about. But that was fantastic to watch in moments against Germany. And the players that aren't in that 11, players like Griezmann, who would come in and add so much more. I mean, you put Pogba in that midfield, you put Griezmann in the front there, you put Mendy at left back. That's an incredible, fluid, attacking, pace, skill, everything. And that's what you want to see at a World Cup. I think we all would love to see them playing like that at a World Cup, just going at a team. Having said all of that, I don't expect to see it because I think Deschamps will lean on what he knows.
Yeah, that's always the tricky thing, isn't it? They've got so many great attacking players, and the positive is they can play great football in both those attacking ones with so many different options. I mean, obviously Lacazette and Martial on Tuesday, and Griezmann and Giroud, and although Coman didn't really impress on that game, but they have the options there because then there's still Lemar, there's still Dembele to come back into the fold as well. It does add up a couple of interesting options really for them. And do you have a preference really, Tom? I mean, we were mentioning on Monday that maybe Deschamps is leaning more towards the 4-2-3-1 as exampled in the Wales game a bit more because they've seen the progress that Pogba's made in that two-man midfield at Manchester United before his injury, but also then came back with a 4-3-3 that was also exciting. So it's a tough choice, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. I think what's going on is it depends on the opposition they're playing. As we mentioned, when they're on a counter-attack and a team that's likely to dominate against the Germany, a 4-3-3 suits them because it gives them a little bit more expansive play going forward. However, when they play a team that they're going to be on top against, a 4-2-3-1 with Pogba next to a holding midfielder, as he's done at United before his injury, like you said, I think that suits them. However, as a personal preference, and watching the two games that have just been this week, it's hard not to be excited when you watch them play in the 4-3-3 because it's so quick, it's so fast, and as Samuel said, if they get Mendy back at left back, that is going to be. It's going to be like watching Monaco again. It's going to be fast play that gets people off their seats, and you're going to sit there and you're going to take notice. And I think at the back of my head, I'll look at it and just think this is not going to happen. As exciting as it is, and as fun as it is, and all the positives about it, it's hard to move away from the 4-2-3-1 when it's got some good results for Deschamps in the past. He does like Giroud, and he might not be the most exciting forward in the world, as many people like to point out, but he's still got a very good goal record. He's still very efficient when he's playing up front. He does work well with Griezmann, who's another player that you would have to fit into this system. Kante would have to come into a 4-3-3 alongside Pogba, and then you got to fit a lot of other players around it. It's going to be quite hard to fit players around certain formations, knowing what Deschamps likes to play. But as much as I love the 4-3-3, and I think that's what they should go for in the future, certainly in the World Cup, it would be hard to see Deschamps and France move away from a 4-2-3-1 with, Giroud up top with a lot of players supporting him.
Yeah, it feels like this France team at the moment, if they could only just get a left back, not a left back, sorry, a right back, or a left back in Mendy, but a right back engineered like him, they might be onto something really, really special. But at least the cogs are turning. At least there's options there now. At least we feel like this France team can mix it up a little bit with these bigger teams. And it will be interesting come December 1st. Mark it in your calendars. That's when we'll find out the group in the World Cup. And I'm pretty sure everyone's looking forward to that. That could be a really, really spicy one. Let's go back to domestic matters now, obviously, because the Ligue 1 action is back this weekend. And an interesting game, really, to start us off on Friday evening, and that's Saint-Etienne heading to Lille. And I'm starting with the away side first, as we've mentioned in the news, because of the Oscar Garcia removal, as it was. It seems to be he has left, but it seems more like a mutual decision in the wave of things. There is a report on our website that tells you a little bit more about the situation. Basically, it seems like Oscar Garcia was given a couple of promises in the summer, including a number of players he wanted to bring in. Unsurprisingly, they didn't come through the door, which isn't so much of a surprise for sometimes in these clubs. He was asking for players similar to like Bojan, which makes a lot of sense with his roots back in Barcelona. Instead, he got Luis Dioni, which he didn't agree to, at least anyway, which might explain why we've seen him very little so far this season. But he's decided to leave due to that friction. The board are also reportedly not happy with his lack of attacking play that they wanted to see after Christophe Galtier. It's Julien Juju Sablé who will be their permanent manager from the seams of things. The interview earlier today with Roland Romier announced that he would be not an interim manager. So it seems like he, at least in that wording, is their new permanent manager. What do you make of all of this, Sam? It's kind of, in a way, came out of the blue. I know it's come after a horrific sort of defeat in their own derby that really damaged a lot of the fans' belief in him, but it didn't seem to be bubbling under the surface before now, and it's sort of all exploded at once.
Yeah, I mean, that's not the next name on the list. I think if you'd asked people who's the next Ligue 1 manager to go, you wouldn't have jumped straight to Garcia. You wouldn't have jumped straight to a club that's not really in crisis. I mean, Saint-Etienne are not in great form, obviously. They're only as high in the table as they are because they started the season so well. But the 5-0 thrashing in the derby aside, and yes, it's hard to put that to the side, you wouldn't have turned around and thought that was the first team to make the change. But it does seem as though after the derby, Garcia pushed again for the changes he wanted to see made. He wanted to apparently make some changes to the team now. He was told to wait until January. That wasn't good enough, so he's walked. The fact that he's apparently walked without even taking any compensation, only taking pay up to the day that he left the club is interesting. It's an odd one, but it just adds to the whole thing. And this has now fallen right in the lap of Sablé, and it's going to be a very tricky job for him. And he's a really young guy. He's scarcely just into coaching. He's coached a couple of the youth sides at Saint-Etienne, and he's been in charge of the youth development squad since this summer. It's a big job. He's only 37. He's a little bit older than some of his former teammates at the club who he's now managing. It's a very tricky situation. And if Saint-Etienne weren't worried before the derby, this has not been a great couple of weeks for them at all.
No, and it's a strange one. Admittedly, Oscar Garcia is a good manager. He has his passionate moments. I know when he resigned as Brighton manager, it was after a playoff semi-final. It sent a little bit out of the blue, given how well they'd performed that season, and obviously his other time in England was very short due to health reasons, really. But he's carved out a nice little career, really, Tom. Really, with good spells at Salzburg and his previous job at Brighton, he did very well as well. But how difficult it really is it for a manager that doesn't get players that they want, and that sets a precedent, doesn't it?
I can imagine it being quite tough for someone that has such set ideas about who they want to bring in and certain players they want and certain ways they want to play. And if you don't get these, if you don't get these players and you're not able to set up a certain way, then a lot of your pre-season work that you had prior to taking the job and prior to the start of the season, most of it's out the window because you haven't been able to get the targets you want. Obviously, this might shock you, but I don't have any experience as a football manager apart from on the game. And when I don't get a target I want, I don't like it. So imagine what it's like for someone that does this for a job and does it for a living. If he set out a short list of 20 odd players and every single one of them got rejected, and then he's been given players that he doesn't necessarily want, then I kind of understand where he's coming from. I kind of understand why he'd be frustrated, and I maybe not walk away without any compensation. That, like you said, Sam, it's interesting. I've not really known of that to happen very often, but if it can be very tough when you've got a set idea and certain play, you go into a job knowing or having an idea of what you want and who you want to perform certain roles, and then if you don't get any of the players you want and you're given people that in your mind don't suit your play, then it's going to be tough.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about Oscar Garcia doing the right thing, that he wasn't given promises and the like, but I also have to side with the club a little bit. I mean, they were expecting a better brand of football, and we've yet to really see it. I mean, we saw it in brief spells maybe at the start of the season, but there's been unrest with Jonathan Bamba not getting a new contract. There's been other little pieces here and there where they started to struggle, a couple of injuries, like Perrin obviously not playing that derby, and that sort of cascading as well. It all seems to come up to a head, really. That's sort of one of those unstoppable things that seems to happen, unfortunately. And I don't think that in the first place, we all, at the start of the season, when Oscar Garcia was announced as the manager, we were all scratching our heads a little bit, at least anyway. It didn't seem like the right kind of appointment for the club to try and do something different. And now the new appointment of the young manager, whether that's the right step in the right direction, it remains to be seen. It's a very risky one, but I suppose the only one really they can make at this sort of stage in the season. But they face a team that used to be in crisis, at least before the international break, in Lille, Sam, who did manage their first win since the first opening game of the season. It took another 11 games or so, but they beat Metz 3-0 at home. That Marseille result now as well, it seems like building blocks are starting to finally be made there, isn't it?
Definitely, yeah, exactly. I mean, after that Marseille game, I think we all sort of thought, well, geez, that could be the penultimate nail in Bielsa's coffin, that they played well, but they still lost. They went to Metz, and you thought, well, geez, if they don't get a result here, he really is in trouble. The crowd was starting to turn on him, but they did what they had to do, and they won that game. And now you probably couldn't ask for a better opponent than Saint-Etienne, who are obviously changing horses midstream, who are without some key players, who really sort of in disarray and coming off that derby thrashing. Lille have had 2 weeks off after that good win to just be on the training pitch. Very few of their players have gone on international duty. Bielsa's had 2 weeks to just be with the players and tell them, reinforce again his ideas, get everything clear, get everything fresh. Nice home game in front of the renewed faith of the fans, hopefully. This is perfect timing for Lille, and Saint-Etienne might find themselves becoming the second victim. Lille had to wait nearly 3 months for their second win of the season, and the third could be right around the corner.
Yeah, and looking at the games after this one as well, Amiens, Montpellier, I know they play Lyon at the very end of the month, but those are two very winnable games, and that's where you start building that little bit of momentum. The December doesn't look too great. I'm looking at Paris Saint-Germain and Nice staring me at the face Nice twice, in fact, in two different competitions. But yeah, that might just build that little bit of a base where they need to really start edging their season out, especially come the second half of the season. Let's get some predictions in this one then. Tom, I'll start with you.
I'm going to go for an exciting 1-1.
Sam?
I'm going to back Lille to repeat the trick and win it again 3-0.
I'm really, really intrigued by this game. I'm definitely going to tune into this one tomorrow because it has just so many little storylines there for both sides really to try and build on. I'm going to give it Saint-Etienne just. I think it'll be 2-1. I think maybe the new manager bounce might be just enough for some of the players to maybe even someone like Dione, who wasn't even really fancied. Maybe this is finally his time to come into the spotlight a little bit more, shall we say. We move to action on Saturday, which starts with the current leaders, Paris Saint-Germain, taking on Nantes. Tom, PSG have been in excellent form this season, really. I think that's the best way to put it, really. And they come off a really fluent, exciting win against Angers last week as well. They will still be without Neymar, obviously, because of suspension. So it'll be an interesting one, won't it, to see how they continue without Neymar. And I wrote a piece that was maybe slightly controversial this week about him maybe being a luxury player in the side. Could they possibly show that to be true again if they perform as exciting as they did against Angers a couple of weeks ago?
Well, I read your piece and I agreed with it, if I'm perfectly honest. You know, the excitement around Neymar when he arrived, and as much as we all enjoy Ligue, we watch it every week and we talk about it and we talk to others about it. He wasn't signed for that. He can be not rested. Well, he's suspended anyway, but they can afford to have him miss out on certain games and still come away with a 5-0 win like they did last time. The only difference is he going to be fresh when it matters in the bigger games? Is it going to change the way they play against a Lyon or a Marseille or a Monaco when he's not playing in certain matches beforehand? But at the same time, looking at it as a whole team view, I think sometimes they perform better when he's not there because the attention is spread out a bit more when he's not on the field, and other players get the chance to shine. And I think that's what this team needs. You know, for people that don't watch it as much as we do, and some of the other people that are heavily interactive on social media do, surprisingly the team is more than just Neymar. There are a lot of good players in the team, and they get the chance to shine when he's not there, as they did last time out. And I think this week will be another chance to show not only can they perform without him in the league, but that someone called Nathan was quite right to put out a piece about him.
Yeah, I did preface it by saying that having someone scoring 7 goals and having about 8 assists is a nice luxury to have, really, to be fair. But they all seem to perform better in the spaces that Neymar seems to occupy. I mean, Draxler works well in that whole sort of 20 yards away from goal to the left of the box, and that's where Neymar loves to drift into. Therefore, Pastore can move into the space that Draxler was in. Then Rabiot can move into that space. It was strange how, and then Mbappe's further centrally because then Dani Alves can move further on the wing. It's strange how little shifts like that, even on great players, can change formations and styles so differently. But they come against what someone would expect as a brick wall, at least anyway, to some, being it Claudio Ranieri team in Nantes. Sam, I mean, they got back on the horse a couple of weeks before the international breaks by beating Toulouse in a really nice performance again. But this is going to be a backs to the walls job again. But is there any better team in Ligue 1 that you could say that could try something like parking the bus, so to speak, against Paris Saint-Germain?
It's funny you say parking the bus. Ranieri's press conference today, he promised that he won't park the bus. In fact, he'll park 2 buses. Which you set me up very nicely for. I think we have seen one other team do a good job of that against PSG this season, and that was Montpellier. And they did a great job, and they got the point. And again, it was a game without Neymar, a game where maybe Neymar could have made an impact, could have perhaps helped them find the breakthrough, but he was again missing, becoming a bit of a theme for PSG this season, Neymar not being there. But this is a game. If PSG are really going to drop points at all, this is the kind of game where you can see them doing it because, as you say, there are not many teams better at backs to the wall, defensively organised, very, very deep, on the break. Exactly what troubled PSG last season. PSG were undone time and again by teams that were just better organised and unwilling to take risks, and that's a Ranieri team. just in a nutshell. They won't take any risks. They'll just be organised. They'll be deep. They'll be frustrating. It probably won't be the most attractive game of football, but they will try and hit PSG on the break. And PSG are a little bit thin in sort of the squad. Draxler's not trained yet. Meunier's not trained yet. Both could miss the game. Mota, we've seen he's out for the rest of the season. Kimpembe suspended. They are a little bit low on troops. This could be one that might just sneak by them, and Nantes probably good value to fight for a draw, if not to get the draw.
Yeah, I couldn't think of a better team to really try and park the bus than a Claudio Ranieri's team, given his former reputation, especially even in everywhere he's been really, other than possibly that season with Leicester. But I do love a game where someone tries to drag another team into the mud, and whether Paris Saint-Germain fall into that trap or not remains to be seen. But let's get some predictions, and I'll start with you this time, Sam. What's your prediction in this one?
I'm going to back Nantes to get the draw. I think it's going to be a goalless draw. I think it's going to be fun for the certain kind of fans. It's not going to be super attractive, but it's going to be fun.
Tom?
As much as I would love Nantes to get, a drab 0-0, I love how dire their results seem to be. I just don't think this is the result for them, and I'm thinking it's a 2-0 PSG.
Yeah, I'm going to say that I pretty much eat my words in this one by Paris Saint-Germain putting a relatively torrid performance in against a side that's going to really, really push them to try and create it with 11 men behind the ball. So I'm going for a 1-0 win, and then Neymar to probably get a hat-trick as soon as he returns. Next one on our agenda this evening is Caen-Nice, which is an interesting one for two sides that were in completely different sets of form, that had a stumble or a slight recovery, at least in the terms of Nice. And that's where I'll start this one with you, Tom. And the main man at the moment, really, and he won't be in this one, is Mario Balotelli, who will be suspended because of a silly yellow card last week. But they've been on an awful run of form, really, before that game against Dijon. There were 5 losses in a row in all competitions, their worst run for since about 2008, I think it was. Is this an ideal game with a Caen side that have come off a really bad defeat before the international break for them to get back on the horse? Or is that sort of trip to a side that are great at home so far this season really not ideal for them to come up against when they're recovering from such an awful run?
I think it's a bit of both, really. I think it's a good type of team to play because it gives them the chance to get back on form and to rectify some of the previous results they've had. On the other hand, they are playing a team that is, as you mentioned, quite good at home. But that might play into Nice's hands in a way because the pressure's not on them. And it will be on them, but at the same time, people will look at it and go, well, if Caen are a good team at home, so maybe they'll ease up on Nice a little bit if they don't get a result. But at the same time, they might look at it and, without Balotelli in the team taking a lot of the attention and whatnot, maybe it frees them up a little bit. Maybe I'm just looking at it and trying to give Nice some positives. I think on paper, it will be tough for them. But at the same time, I think the situation might play into their hands a little bit. And, they've had time to rest and to get back, as a unit and maybe change up a few things and plan without Balotelli with advance time as opposed to just a week normally. I think it might play into their hands, but at the same time, I say that with a bit of trepidation. I'm not entirely confident, but I think it might do them well.
Yeah, it's a really interesting game, really, because looking at Caen, obviously they're sat in 7th, which is absolutely insane for them. Their fans must be absolutely jubilant, even though they've come off a 5-0 loss against Marseille, and they have actually only won one of the last 4. That form really in late August, September has really helped them stead through, but a couple of little 1-0 wins here and there. But that was the first time that they were really blown out the water, Sam, really, in that game in the Velodrome just before the international break. Will that be a little bit of a worry for the side heading into thinking that this game might have been easier a couple of weeks ago, but now much, much harder than it probably was looking like it was on the calendar a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, it's an interesting one with Con because they did begin the season so well, and then they not really fallen apart, but really slowed down, and it's not been the same tight, cohesive. Everyone's sort of pulling in the same direction. The impressive stuff we saw at the start of the season, and that really came to a head against Marseille, where they really were kind of all over the shop, and it was pretty uninspired. Saying that, though, they get to go back home again, where they are I think they're the second best home record. No, the fourth best home record in the league. And they're against a team with the second worst away record in the league. So, in a way, this is still a pretty great fixture for them. It's a great opportunity to bounce back. I mean, it's not often a team gets spanked 5-0 and doesn't respond the next week. I mean, it does happen from time to time, but you'd have to expect that Caen at home, knowing how well they've done previously this season, and then coming off that defeat, they've got to be smarting, they've got to be hurting, and you've got to think they'll probably respond. I mean, Nice still are not anywhere near the side they were. We've seen them in fits and starts. We've seen them in moments. Of course, they smashed Monaco again, and they looked good in that game, but it feels like if Seri doesn't play, and he might play in this one, but we're not sure yet, if he doesn't play, they don't look very good. And as you say, there's no Balotelli, so there goes your main source of goals. It's a very difficult one to predict, but Caen, I think it's a good opportunity for them to bounce back.
Before I get your predictions, I will give you a little bit of assistance on this one by saying Caen have not drawn a game this year. Every single game they have had this season, the first scorer has won that game. It's very easy to see that straight from the list because they've only had one game that hasn't resulted in one side not scoring. So that makes it a little bit easier. But the other game was 2-1 and they scored first. So I'll get some prediction and I'll start off first by saying it will be the first draw of the season. But I think it'll be 1-1. I think Caen maybe just have a little bit of enough to hold off Nice for a long while. But I think Nice might be just starting to get back on the horse. Tom?
I'm glad you mentioned the no draw stat because my prediction is a draw. I think it'll be a 1-1 as well.
Sam?
I mean, my prediction really has to lean on whether or not Seri plays. And so I'm going to assume Seri does play. And if Seri does play, then I'm backing Nice to win it 1-0.
Man, that's a justifiable reason as I can see it, at least anyway. Final game this week, and it's on Sunday evening. It's between Bordeaux and Marseille. I'll start with the visitors really first, and they've been in a nice little bit of run of form again. I mean, since that Paris Saint-Germain game, they've won the last game against Caen relatively comfortably. In the Lille game, it was a little bit more dicey, but they're in form. But I do want to talk about one man in particular, really, with you, Tom, and that's Florian Thauvin, who scored twice and created assist. We spoke about on Monday's pod that he's really the forgotten man, unfortunately, for France national team because there's so much talent in those wide areas. But for the last year and a half, really, he's been a real talisman for Marseille, and rightfully so, is really leading the line for them.
Oh, yeah. He's a wonderful player. He really is. And if you mention him being the forgotten man at France, again, it's not really his own fault. He's done all he can to even get into the squad, but they've got so many good players in the position he plays in that, begrudgingly he has to miss out. People remember him from his time at Newcastle, where he wasn't, he didn't pull up many trees, if any. And then he goes back to Marseille. And unfortunately, they go in and bring Dimitri Payet. I say unfortunately from his point of view. Payet he's the rock and roll star of the team. He's the big name. He's the big price. And everybody's attention is on Payet. Payet's back. Payet's back. He's gonna do this. He's gonna do that. But it's Thauvin. That's the one that's doing all the good work. He's the one that's the star of the team. He's the one that you got to build around. Not only is he younger, but he's playing better at the moment. And I think it's quite unfair on him in a way that only now are the majority of people kind of realising he's the guy in this team. He's the guy that's the match winner when things are going down. He scored the goal to put them 2-1 ahead against PSG, and if it wasn't for that free kick, it would have been the winner. So he would literally have been the match winner in their biggest game of the season so far. So unfortunately for him, other circumstances at club and country level have affected his reputation in a way. But I feel he's the star of this Marseille team.
He absolutely is. And credit to him, really. That time at Newcastle, he was lambasted for the longest time for the sort of tuxedo gate that happened there after having one okay game for them. But he's really matured since that moment and has come on to be a real star for Marseille. But Sam, they have awkward opponents, at least usually, in Bordeaux. But they've lost their last 3 games in their last 4 in 5, in fact, except from that draw against Nantes. And last time out, it was a pretty dreadful game, and they an own goal from Jeremy Touloulan, which kind of sums up his season really in that one as well. In the 1-0 defeat to Rennes last time out, they're really fading, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's not that long ago we were talking about them as being perhaps this season's third force alongside PSG and Monaco in France, and that now seems like we were very, very far off the mark. They've run out of luck, it seems like, and there's been nothing to replace that. These defeats, some of these games just die. I mean, Amiens, that was rough. The Monaco just dealt with them quite comfortably. The Rennes game, as you mentioned, another just pretty unpleasant. Ever since PSG thrashed them, they tried to play PSG at their own game. They tried to attack, and they got just crushed 6-2, and could have been worse, honestly. It's just not looked like turning around for them, and they're still in the top half. They're still looking perhaps up the table. You know, they win this game, and they're still sort of in the conversation for that third Champions League place, maybe. But really, if they're going to turn things around again, it has to happen this weekend. It has to happen in this sort of Champions League 6-pointer, if you like, against Marseille. And I just don't see that happening. I mean, they haven't shown a great deal. They've got no one to score goals. They've got no one to create much of anything. I mean, Kamano is one of the highest assist makers in the league, but that's just kind of a quirk of statistics. You don't see that when you watch them play. It's a lot of not much, really. And if they're going to turn things around, if they're going to relight the fires and look as good as they did at the start of the season, we need Malcolm to find that form that he did have, which now appears to be sort of fleeting. I need Nicolas de Préville maybe to actually score a goal. It doesn't look great for Bordeaux.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things at play really for Bordeaux as well. I think we're starting to see that there was a lot of individualism in this side before the start of the season where they were succeeding. I mean, they relied a lot on Malcolm, but you look at Kamano and he can try and maybe do a little bit too much. De Préville's snatching at things because he's not been scoring goals. You look at Sabali, who started the season so well, scoring goals as well from midfield, was really trying to push himself further forward as the midfield man they needed. Not Varda, not any other than one they've brought in, but they've mixed out. And now they're just struggling for depth. I mean, they can't really change things because they can't bring anyone in from the bench to make a difference. They don't have that in defence. They don't really have that in midfield either. I mean, other than Varda, but he keeps moving him in and out. They're not really settled, and the fact that they started Monday over De Préville against Rennes, and he still had a couple of half decent chances that he should have done a little bit better with, showed that they just don't have the options there, and that's the problem that this team is going to face if they want to get Champions League football or anywhere near that, or even Europa League football at the rate they've gone in the last couple of weeks. It's the fact that they need January to come around as soon as possible and try and find some new players and maybe really revitalise their start of the season and get players performing again. It's a tough one, really is. So let's get some predictions finally on this one, and I'll start with you, Sam. What do you think is going to happen in this one?
I'm starting to really buy into this Marseille side. I think they have something. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but the way they didn't give up in the PSG game, the way that they came back in that crazy Nice game, 2-0 down, win 4-2. It's sort of a theme. I think there is a bit of a spirit and a harmony, and they're not a fantastic side yet, but I feel like there's something happening there, and I think that's the exact opposite of what is happening at Bordeaux. So I'm gonna back Marseille. I think Marseille should probably do this comfortably, but then they don't Marseille don't really do anything comfortably, but I'll back them to win this 3-1.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there just seems to be something that's just about missing from Marseille from being really, really good. I mean, Gustavo's come in the last couple of weeks after that goal against Paris, obviously, and the strike he had against Caen was a nice finish to start things off very early on. He's starting to come in his own. The defence is looking a little bit better. I mean, it's not a difficult thing to do after some of the things we saw earlier on this season, but there's just a little bit of hope there. Again, if they get to January in the summer and bring a couple more players in, they'll be a really interesting side again. So I'm going for a Marseille win as well, and I'm going for 2-0. I really can't see this Bordeaux team digging itself out of this hole against a side like this. Tom?
Yep, both of you touched on the points that I was going to make. There's something about this Marseille team that I really like. But I don't know what it is quite yet. I don't think they're quite aware of what it is just yet. They just keep winning. I think they're going on good form. Bordeaux, on the other hand, aren't on good form. They haven't scored for 3 games. So I'm going to go with 2-0.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one at least. That's all for this week. My thanks to Sam, Tom, and all of you listening at home. Join us for the main show on Monday. But for now, enjoy your weekend of football.